this month's episode of the Fantasy Book of the Month podcast for September. My name is Katie. I am currently wearing a gray shirt. Next up is Dan.
Hey, I'm Dan Evanson. I'm currently wearing like a sea green kind of.
All right, next up we have Nick.
Hey guys, I'm wearing a dark blue shirt and drinking a nice cup of black coffee.
Gross, but next up we have Peter.
Hi there, I'm Peter. I'm also wearing clothes.
Excellent. And Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm wearing a black shirt and not drinking anything because I'm a scrub.
Okay. Go team.
Treat your voice with respect, everybody. Have some water, drink something. Lubricate your voice.
Nothing like hot coffee. Excellent. Hot coffee to soothe the vocal cords.
Great. I'm also just drinking water in case we care.
Yes, me too. Room temperature tap water. We're so exciting. This is the most exciting we've ever been.
So, Katie, what is our theme this month?
Well, thank you for asking, Peter. Our theme this month is war. As we all know, it never changes and is good for nothing. So let's start with the reviews.
Wait. You want to start with the reviews?
Oh, sorry, you're right. Katie, we should stick around for another 20 minutes.
You're disrupting the whole formula of this program.
I got some fun war facts. Okay, correction. I got one fun war fact.
What's a fun war fact?
It's not fun, but I have a fact.
People died.
And it's about war.
Yes.
People died to bring you this fact.
I found it on the New York Times. Thank you very much.
Well, lay it on us.
That in the last 3,400 years, there's only been 268 years of peace.
How many years? No, the first number, not the second one.
No one said there would be math in our war episode.
So, I mean, that seems, how do you...
How do you come by that number?
Yeah, relative peace. Talking about my hometown, because that's been pretty peaceful.
Total global peace.
I was assuming it was global peace. That's why it's so small, because it wasn't taking into account individual countries. So
so no nation on nation combat.
Well, it was if there's a war somewhere going around around in the world, they counted it as a year of war instead of a year of peace.
Thanks, New York Times. You're just the best.
And that's 8% of recorded history.
Now that we're talking about it,
that's a much more interesting fact that it's only 8%.
I'm surprised that I didn't think to read Piers Anthony's war book from the Incarnations of Immortality series for this, because one of the characteristics of it, as written in the book, is that there's a person who embodies and represents war and kind of manages war across the world. And then if at any point there is total global peace, I guess on a national or something scale, the embodiment of war is immediately retired. They just their job's up, they're done. And next time any war breaks out, someone else needs to take the job. But I'm surprised I didn't think of that book.
Yeah, war is a pretty broad topic.
It is.
Can anyone think of any fantasy book that doesn't have aspect of war in it?
Define aspects of no fighting whatsoever, or no organized militaristic fighting?
I would say fighting, because technically it's not organized militaristic fighting. It's more of ongoing conflict.
Yeah, Rachel, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something that I was considering when we decided on this topic. Yeah, I would say all fantasy to some degree has elements of war, right? But there's really two ways to interpret it. Is the war part of the setting, or is it actually part of the conflict in the book, right? Because there are some books where war is only just the backdrop.
You have the large military campaign fantasies, and you just have what are people doing in this war-torn setting?
What did you guys come across when you were thinking about this topic?
I mean, even Harry Potter eventually gets into a war. The last book is almost entirely a war book, essentially.
It's called the Second Wizarding War.
I mean, it's a good point. So I've been quiet because you've shut me up while I try to think through my brain for a fantasy book that doesn't have, I guess, any fighting in it at all, if that's the criterion.
Or just, I mean, I'm having trouble even thinking of stuff that doesn't eventually get to a broader conflict, that doesn't take its conflict and move it out beyond the bounds of the characters eventually.
Right.
I asked my roommate this question, and her answer was Slow Regard of Silent Things, the Patrick Rothfuss novella.
I haven't read that one.
I guess that's true. There's no actual war in those books. It just, like, I guess there's like the personal war that Quoth has in the series, but yeah, Slow Regard for Silent Things is very much a
slice of life.
Well, but they clearly have war in the background
kind of book, yeah. Right. Well, not in Slow Regard for Silent Things, I don't think. Like,
I believe that. I haven't seen it, or I mean, read it.
In the series as a whole, there is some war in the backdrop, as well as a lot of war in the history, and the history of that world is pretty important to the story. So
yeah, it also feels like the story is ramping up to a war with Quoth, because given his assumed nickname of King Killer.
Yeah, well, and I mean, everyone's being recruited for soldiery in the present time that we see as a framing device. Clearly, there's a war going on.
And then you also, in fantasy, you also have the war between humans and some of the creature. Like, Ruby's just on my mind. In Ruby, they have hunters against, huntsmen against the Grimm, which are constantly attacking humanity and stuff like that.
I know when I was picking the book, I mean, what I really wanted to do was find a book that was about war, simply because as a topic, I don't typically like to read that type of book. You know, I was never a big like Tom Clancy fan or anything like that.
I think part of the conclusion that we're sort of coming to here, though, is that war is fundamentally tied to the fantasy genre to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, it comes from the old stories that were recorded, and most of those are about conflict wrought.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I keep like, it certainly seems to be the way our conversation is going, but I still disagree with the premise. Just that it must be possible to have a fantasy novel that is not about fighting, that isn't set in a war, or isn't about people participating in war. And I mean, the more I feel like I've read some, although more of those are going to have been young adult books at the oldest.
Yeah, I was thinking through that too, and I was like, well, I read The Thief Lord recently. It's, aimed at like 12-year-olds, but there's no war in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure there has to be some. So I'm personally having a hard time thinking of any, but I think there are some elements of war that are pretty. I want to try to break this down a little bit, because this is, to me at least, a very interesting thing. Is what are the elements that fantasy takes from war, or that it a lot of authors feel it is necessary to include some element of war in their stories. Like, why is that?
So why is it so common?
Yeah.
I feel like it's easy because you can do a massive amount of world building with war.
Well, I think it's easy, and that's why a lot of people go for it. I think fantasy genre has a reputation, same as science fiction and maybe horror, for being less character driven, more plot driven or world driven. And it's kind of not damaging exactly. It's I think related to why those genres get sidelined as genre fiction instead of real literary fiction. Why people don't give it as much respect, one might say. And I think that war or fighting between units, whether it's grand scale or small scale, I think it's an easy way for authors to create conflict and drama and drive a story to a climax and a denouement, which relieves them of the need to really build in character, not arcs. I'm not saying they're neglecting character, but it lowers the pressure on them to make everything internal, which is more the case in, I guess, what you would call modern contemporary literature.
I think there's also a bit of an element of, with fantasy in general, that there's this sort of goal, I think, I think there's a sort of goal to make the story bigger, right?
It's certainly a trend. We see a lot of it.
Right, and it's even fantasy in itself, if it's just like an exploration fantasy, it's really to make the world like bigger and full of wonder and awe, and so war is sort of one of these ways to make just make the story bigger in general, make the impact of the characters bigger.
I was thinking like it's also like it gives the reader power fantasies with stuff like when the main character is fighting this big bad thing, and you can place yourself as the main character.
And genre kind of builds on itself, right? People read fantasy when they're kids, and then they grow up to be authors and want to write something, but you don't want to do less than what the people that came before you did. You want to build on it. You want to go higher and faster and stronger. And so, if you're reading war novels, you're reading Lord of the Rings as a kid, well, you want, 12, 15 Black Riders and 70 orc armies instead of just 2.
Bigger, faster, better, stronger.
I got that in my head too.
Like with the Sabriel, it's, I guess I was thinking it's more like her against the concept of death or death itself. Because I kind of picture her as like the Avatar of but in her world instead of like the Avatar in the Last Airbender. Yeah.
So that's the conflict that drew you to that book.
Also, I was very like emotionally drained at that point, and I wanted something that wasn't going to kill me.
So going back a little bit, when we were talking about how everyone wants to make theirs bigger, they want it to seem like it has more impact. Is that perhaps why we're getting so many apocalyptic type novels?
I also think there was a trend in YA fantasy around 2010 of dystopians.
The post-apocalypse dystopia. Teenagers have to break out of the mold and revolt.
Don't forget that they all have weird long names that they have shortened into something a little more normal.
Yeah, I was a teenager during that time, and I read some of them, and then they all got the same or trash.
Right.
There's the counter move to that, which is some of the like grimdark fantasy, which focuses a lot on like very close personal stories, but they're told in very raw, brutal ways, as opposed to the kind of big, way pulled back war stories that focus on army movements and things like.
I was thinking, because I've been reading the Milan series so far. I was taking a break because that series is long, and I was thinking comparing that between that and Stormlight. They're both military campaigns, but Stormlight seems less focused on the campaign, I guess. I don't know.
No, 100%. Yeah.
Especially in the beginnings of Stormlight, where you're following Kaladin a lot, and he's out on the campaign as a bridgeman. You see that war, in many ways, is a backdrop, and it's really, the story is about the trials that he has to go through in order to become what he is to become, right?
Yes.
And the war, it's funny because the war in Stormlight starts out, again, like I said, as a backdrop where they're fighting the Parshendi, but it sort of shifts from a backdrop of a war to the actual conflict when those Parshendi go through their transformation and sort of actually embody the evilness. Because at the beginning, they're both just kind of people, right? And then the later in the Parshendi sort of actually become evil.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. Like in those books, there are almost no characters that are really coming along like, hey, this war is nonsense and we should stop. I mean, I think that's made pretty clear to the audience, the reader. But as far as the characters are concerned, they're like, man, we love war and we can't wait for it to keep going.
War, 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 war.
Well, there's because there's two main takes you take of war. You have like the glorification, I guess, of war, or like the profiting off the war, or a lore of righteousness, or the common theme of war is hell.
Right.
Stormlight does a pretty good job of giving you both of those, right? Where, there's the aristocratic level, where they're propping up their nation, they're enriching themselves in the war, and then there's Kaladin's level where he's just trying to keep his friends alive.
Well, and that's the thing. War isn't just about action and battle and death, right? I think in fantasy, it also gives a lot of insight into the politics of things.
I feel like as soon as you reach the sort of national level conflict, if you're not including the politics, and you are I don't want to say like doing a disservice to the reader, but I mean, I don't know how you can not include it. Like there has to be a reason for the war. The reason has to be, righteous or unrighteous, moral or immoral. Like there's just no choice at that point. I think that's why I don't like war novels, because they do tend to get preachy in a lot of cases. For the most part, I think like war is no good and war serves no purpose kind of stuff, and in some cases, they forget the character, and the character kind of subsides to the message of what's going on. And really good books, and one I picked for this week is going to be one of those. Can do both. They hold on to the character's depth and then also have a message to give out on the topic of the war that goes on in its pages.
Mentioning back to what you said about like if you are going at a war on a national scale, then you definitely have to make mention of the politics of it. But I sort of made one little note here about how the size of the war sort of can affect the story, whether it's like a local war, like just like little skirmishes between two factions, or whether it's actually like a national war, a civil war even, or even in a lot of these fantasy books nowadays, a lot of them are doing like cosmic scale.
Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot, and I mean a lot, of here's a war or a series of wars or just a fantasy novel where the big conflict is going to impact everything. It's really a global issue or cosmic issue, or at the very least an international issue. And I myself have been drawing more and more toward smaller, more personal conflicts, things that are important to a handful of people, and I find that more interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the flaws that I've found with these like big cosmic wars or cosmic issues is that a story really can only focus on so many characters before it gets like overwhelming for the reader. Mm-hmm. And a war of that size is going to have so much going on. Like it's not believable to say this one character is going to save the universe. You know what I mean? Because it's more than just one person who's doing things, generally speaking, right? I mean, so to sort of oversimplify, to create something on a cosmic scale and then to oversimplify it down to one character is going to save everything is a little ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, Chosen Ones and that sort of contrived singleness for a character can sometimes feel heavy-handed and forced, for sure,
and tiresome.
Yeah, because we've seen it so much, especially after you get pretty widely read. It is every, but I mean there are places where I still love that, like My Hero Academia, I think, is probably the best one of those, where it has a kind of chosen one single hero main character, but and there is a sort of war going on behind the scenes, which is mostly like heroes versus villains. It's kind of a superhero story. I mean, it's very much a superhero story, but it does such a great job of focusing and unfocusing on its main character, pulling back and looking at broader things and setting the stage. But then when it's finally got something to save, that main character kind of steps back to the front and it really focuses on him and tells a great story around that character that then leads to the next, pullback to talk about the next thing. It's one of my favorite fantasy superhero anything's going on right now.
I think anytime, as long as you focus on the character or the small number of characters and really pay attention to them, then I think, any size of story can be interesting, engaging, compelling, et cetera, et cetera.
That's what I really like about Stormlight. They have a large cast of characters, but each book so far has mainly focused on one character and told their story through their backstory, and you learn more about them in that specific book.
Yeah, that is the tactic he's using there is absolutely brilliant.
Totally agree, especially that third one. I think in the first two books, the character of Dalinar, I mean, not that he wasn't interesting, but
no, he wasn't interesting.
Never felt like he had he just didn't have a lot of depth he was almost like a plot device more than he was a character, and then he just comes to life in that third one. It's incredible once we actually get behind his eyes.
I think it was sort of on purpose too. He's supposed to be like this hardened war general, so you really can't see past that wall in the first two books. And it's only once he sort of, again, those books are all about a character going through trials to become what they're supposed to be. And so it's really the third book where Dalinar does that. And that's when you start to see through that wall and really see him as a character. And it's just brilliant.
The third book also has some of my favorite quotes, and they're mostly from Dalinar.
Yeah.
Well, much as I love talking about a book I've never read, maybe is it time to start in on our little reviews?
Yeah.
Well, I guess Peter's volunteering to go first. Take it away, Peter.
That's what I heard.
And away I go. Well, despite my statement earlier that I prefer books where the stakes are not cataclysmic, big, determines the fate of the world, good versus evil sort of stuff, I read The Black Company by Glen Cook, which does in fact concern a very stereotypical or traditional, I guess stereotypical is probably the wrong word, a very traditional, familiar seeming clash of the armies of the good gathering together to overthrow the evil, the evil army run by the big bad guy who's trying to take over the world. The interesting thing about the book is that it comes at it from the other side. We aren't the good guys. We aren't attached to the good guys. It also isn't a traditional anti-hero narrative. It really follows a small group of mercenaries, the titular Black Company, who are they're all there because they've wanted to leave some awful part of their life behind. And they take a contract with one of the lieutenants for the big bad guy. And they know before very long at all, they know that they're on the bad side, but they're really just trying to get on in the world, doing what they know how to do. It is not, it's not about the military clashes. It's about the perspective of the narrator, who is not a fighter, and who is not, a military person. He's the company doctor and their chronicler, their analyst, the one who records what goes on and leaves these records for the future members of the company. And so it's fascinating watching this very classic, kind of overdone military clash of good versus evil trope from the perspective not only of a non-combatant, but a very small individual. He doesn't have magic powers. He's not an incredible warrior. He knows some things about making people not die after they get hurt, and he writes a lot. Maybe that's why I really like reading the guy, because he likes to write. And it watches this clash from not only the little person's point of view, but from the supposedly evil person's point of view. And we know that he's not evil. We know that despite the nature of this war, it's just more complicated than that. And in fact, it paints a good picture of war as a bunch of little people caught up in forces that they can't influence, that they can barely influence, at least, that they can't deal with, that treat them as ants, because there are also these ancient evil or good who seem to be just about as evil as the evil guys, wizards, who lay waste to battlefields, and the soldiers in the middle can do very little about it. It seems very analogous to soldiers in the trenches while the artillery booms, echoes, crashes around them. There's nothing they can do about that. If a shell comes down next to you, you blow up. All you can do is hope that your artillery quiets their artillery, so that you can maybe make some headway or at least survive. And it pulls the same thing into the fantasy genre, and I'm very fond of it. And I knew going in that at least someone else on this recording had some other strong opinions about it, so maybe we should hear from that.
Well, okay, it's me.
Yeah, it's a surprise.
I disagree. So I read this a long time ago, probably a couple of years ago, but and I will agree with you. It has really good things to do with magic in particular. The sort of martial wizard that it presents is, I think, one of the best things about it. And he has a lot of fun with it, because the wizards are kind of unstable, I guess is a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
So I think there's they start messing with each other and playing magical tricks on each other, and I remember really enjoying that part of it.
And those are the low level wizards. Those are the petty wizards, right? They're not the ones who are throwing army killing magic across the field. They get by using little tricks.
So, and even that, I think that sort of division between, hey, here are the guys, on the front lines, and here are the big types. I think where it loses me is what you were talking about, with the character, the narration character kind of having a tough time understanding some of the bigger things that were happening around him. And in a lot of cases, those bigger things are, I did not read the rest of the series, but I assume they are for later on in the series. They get more developed. Instead, they're just kind of like presented, and then they sort of go away. And like, I remember there was a vampire in the like a jaguar vampire or something.
Oh, there's some kind of were jaguar sort of thing. Yeah.
But I thought they called it a vampire. Anyway, it's an element of the story that kind of pops up a couple of times, but doesn't necessarily go anywhere, although they spend a lot of time being terrified of it.
I feel like that plot thread tied up at the end, but that doesn't mean it felt tied up for you.
Yeah, I mean, I put this series in some of the same space as Malazan, which is that if you can make it through the whole series, it's probably really great. It's just, I read this first one and just realized it probably wasn't for me.
Sure.
with Malazan, I've gotten the impression you either hate it or you either love it.
Yeah, I mean, the first Malazan book, I think does kind of the same things that I had an issue with in this one, which is that it presents a lot of things that are important if you keep reading further on. But if you get to the end of the first book and you're like, what was all that about? Well, you're never going to find out because there's none of that context or information in that first book. You really need to keep going to eventually get the big picture that is just starting to sketch out in the first book.
Well, it's funny because I feel like the first book is fairly well self-contained. I don't know whether it was intended all along as a series or whether the first book was a novel and then the author felt like continuing it. But it feels to me like it's fairly well wrapped up, and part of that is because it is subverting the story patterns that we know, right? It's giving us a different perspective. It's showing things from a more sympathetic perspective, and in the end, without spoiling anything terribly much, yeah, it leaves some things open. But I think, at least my feeling is that we are expected to know where that will go based on the stereotypes and tropes that the author played with throughout the book.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just
it wasn't for you.
Yeah, as a first book, I like to have I wish it had been more self-contained because there were so many parts of it that I did enjoy, like we talked about. And I think it was a good read. Like, it's really well written. I didn't have trouble getting through it. It's just I got to the end and I'm like, no, I think I'm done.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, except now we have to fight.
The war between Dan and Peter.
Our theme is getting pretty meta, guys.
Literary criticism never.
It's time to take sides, all you other people in the podcast.
$20 on Peter.
Yes.
Damn it.
I don't know. I am a cat.
You're also. I thought you were a robot.
I can be a robot cat. Why are you stopping me? Oh.
Listen, I could also be a cat. You don't know. I mean, I have cat presence around me at all times.
Maybe that human picture on his profile is just a diversion.
I do feel pretty nominal most of the time. Just, you're sort of vanilla human. That's probably a good description of what.
That's how I like to describe you to people, Daniel. Nominal.
Why are you describing me to people? All right.
Oh my god.
What does our advertising look like for this show? I don't know. It's just me with a vanilla ice cream, just going. It's kind of like this.
Nominal vanilla human.
It's okay. I describe
+2 to most of your stats.
FBOM podcast. It's nominal.
Well, I describe Katie as a stalker, so that's fine.
Yeah, here we go.
That's a little harsh.
Harsh,
Stalker.
but
How are you supposed to picture me when you can't see me in the bushes?
Holy shit.
You're just.
All right. Does anyone else have any? No one else has read The Black Company?
No,
maybe?
I wanna ask you a little question about it though.
Yeah.
Because there's sort of a whole interesting element of war genre, not even necessarily in fantasy, but in real life too, of the perspective of the war doctors. And I really think it is very interesting that this book had the company's doctor in it. What did that bring to the table?
Well, I think in an intentional inversion, it took the focus away from the actual fighting, right? A lot of books describe very closely either the maneuvering in battles or the individual fights where somebody does a fancy sword move and then ducks and then thrusts and then ducks and thrusts and sword moves, fancy dance, woo. And they can go on for pages like that. And this author dispensed with, if not all of that, nearly all of that. When there were fights, I think the author just wasn't interested in describing them. It was more, if there's a fight, it's more of something like, we quickly rousted them. We took one casualty, so I ended up in the corner, because it's a first-person narration. So I, the doctor, ended up in the corner, sewing this cut shut. So we don't really, we don't revel in the violence. The violence is a thing that happens because sometimes it has to, and then we focus on helping people, or we focus on recording what happened.
So does this doctor sort of have any opinion on war? Do they say like this is bad, or do they just kind of go, it's my job?
It's closer to it's my job. There's certainly times where the narrator like approaches, I'm not sure if moralizing is the right word, expressing opinions on the state of things. Usually, if he does, it's closer to, here's a thing that is regretful, but it's just what happens.
Got it.
There's nobody is trying to, he is certainly not trying to overcome historical momentum and save the world by stopping the war or anything. He is trapped in his little place of it, and he makes it clear, at least for the characters that we come to know, including him, that they're all there because they are running from something. They're all the characters in the Black Company are damaged in some way. Not to say that you have to be damaged to go to war, but they're all. It's very clear that you don't ask questions about people's past. Everyone has sworn an oath to the company because they were leaving something behind, etc.
Okay. So did you like the book?
Oh, I love it. This might be the third time I read it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I read Sabriel by Garth Nix, which is a YA novel, but I found it was suitable for most ages.
Yeah, I never considered it YA when I read it.
It's just the protagonist is a little younger. She is 18, but I guess it reads a little younger. Or the later books. I think the later books follow a 16-year-old protagonist. I cannot remember at this point in time.
Yeah,
but
it can sometimes get tricky to determine if it's like a young adult novel or if it's just the author writing from the perspective of a younger character.
Yeah, also, I think this was written in the 90s, if I remember correctly, so I don't think young adult was very prevalent in that time. Correct me if I'm wrong, though.
No, I mean, it was very much not there wasn't that sort of subdivision of
right.
how you sell books. There was
wasn't
not like a YA target. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read other books by Garth Nix. Like, I've read the Keys to the Kingdom series, I loved it as a kid, but I haven't reread them, so I don't know if they stand up to me being an adult now. But anyways, so Sabriel is a coming-of-age story of Sabriel, the titular character, learning to become the abhorrent, or as she says, keeping the dead dead and binding those who don't want to go. And the war element, I would say, is her constant fight against death itself, and her trying to keep the peace between life and death. And I was going to make a really dumb Avatar reference in the in my review, because I went for an opening line. It was really dumb. I was going to do like a take on the opening, the classic opening of Avatar with like, and then
but I believe Sabriel. Oh, I see.
I have it if you want me to read it.
Well, now you have
I'm
to.
tempted,
You brought it up.
Yeah, let me find. But that'll change when the dead attacked. Only the abhorrent master of charter magic and necromancy. Only she can stop the ruthless dead.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I love Abhor Sun. It's just a great title. It's a good word.
Yeah.
It took me forever how to figure out how to pronounce it. Luckily, I had this time around. I listened to the audiobook, it's narrated by Tim Curry, and that was a pleasure.
Wow.
Yeah, he did the entire series, so.
Okay, that much. I'm not much for listening to my books, but that might be worth it.
Yeah, he did a great job. It was really a pleasure. So this is really following Sabriel learning about the Old Kingdom because she was raised in Excelsior, which is another kingdom across the way, for reasons that are explained later. But she doesn't understand her native country, and what I loved about the series was there was such a line in the division between Excelsior and the Old Kingdom. Excelsior is basically England post World War I or pre World War I, like 1920s, I would say, era of technology. But when you get to the Old Kingdom, it's basically just medieval. Everything is just medieval. Technology does not work, and there's this wall where the Excelsior is trying to keep the Old Kingdom people away from Excelsior, and it's very interesting. They have guns, but they also have chainmail and swords, because sometimes if the wind's just right, the guns will just crap out on them.
Right, because it somehow brings over the laws of nature from Old Kingdom.
Yes, and like time is different in the Old Kingdom. It's just like the Old Kingdom lives in its own little bubble, and it was the only thing I really didn't like about it. I didn't like the romance that much, but I don't like romances in general because most of them I don't are kind of to me.
Why is that?
I just don't like romances. It's just my thing, I guess.
I mean, is it because like of the way that they're executed, or you find most romances not really earned, or is it just you just don't feel like thinking about it?
I just don't. It takes away from the action for me, and I like the action better than the romance.
Sure.
Unless I like slower burn romances, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Or people working for it or something like that.
Right, instead of the burning hot passion you see in a lot of writing.
Yeah, I guess that. Like I've only read like one romance manga, and it's so very, very slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess it's just a me thing. But and that one, it's kind of, she's a teenager, it's a dude. Bleh.
Yep.
Isn't that how most romances are?
I wonder why I don't like most romances then.
So I also read this one a while back, and I feel like there was a very interesting cat in this book.
Yep,
Was
Mugget.
it
You have yet to
Peter?
talk.
No, it's not Peter. Peter doesn't want to be Mugget.
No.
Mugget is delightful, and I love him.
So
I do remember him being the highlight.
I haven't read this book. What is so highlight worthy of Mogget?
He's a sassy ass cat.
Okay, so would you say that he's kind of like Salem?
Yes. Actually, yes. Very much like Salem.
For sure. And he's a good sidekick kind of character, right? Yeah.
And he's obligated to help, but he doesn't really want to help sometimes.
Yeah, like if Sancho Panza was out to really humiliate Don Quixote every once in a while, that's sort of the relationship they have with Sancho.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fickle?
Yeah, he's a cat.
Yeah, if I remember, he has some pretty important plot consequence for himself later on in the novel, but that's probably pretty big spoilers. But yeah, I mean, if like me, you're drawn to any book that features hilarious cats, then Sabriel's for you.
Yeah. Also, you can read the second book in the series without reading the first one, because the second book is a time skip with a different protagonist. Just putting that out there. But I have a really great quote from the book, which I felt very attached to this quote. This is Sabriel talking, and she's like, feeling like a shambling blanket shrouded excuse for a human being.
I can relate. Sometimes I'm not nominal, you guys. Sometimes I'm below nominal. It happens.
Subnominal.
I don't believe it.
So that quote struck a personal chord with me because after a certain point, I'm not a human being.
Well, and you're
a shambling blanket.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're at university. That's pretty typical.
Yeah, burnout is real.
It is.
Yay! 2 more years.
Oh God, I'm so glad I don't ever have to go back to school. I never have to go back.
I just finished 4 years. I have to do 2 more years.
Man, that's
no thanks. I'm happy to stay out of classrooms.
The happiest day of my life was skipping my graduation and knowing that I never had to go back.
Nice.
No, I gotta say the sort of time bubble element of the Old Kingdom sounds really interesting.
Yeah, in the second book, Lyrio, they have a better like shell shock like difference between not shell shock, like juxtaposition between the beginning of the book and then like him, the protagonist entering the Old Kingdom and everything just being changing.
I just love the idea like that it can affect the world outside of it too.
Well, there's something really intriguing about the idea that it carries on the wind somehow. Like I've read a lot of things where it's a bubble. You kind of treat it as a constant radius. It's some sort of physics thing, but the idea that it's somehow like not even an odor, or it's particulates, or it's even just it's unexplainable. It kind of just goes with the wind.
It's like a permeable shroud rather than like a distinct bubble, which I find really fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's something engaging about that.
In the book itself, it was talking about like there's soldiers on the wall who go out to patrol, and they think they're out there for weeks, and they come back and they're like, nope, you've only been gone 3 days, and they make a joke about how pay was a hell.
Yeah. R&R's got to be crappy too. What do you mean I have to go back out there? I've only been back for 3 days.
Yeah, and especially they get hazard pay when they're doing patrol, so they are getting stiffed out of money.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like government the world over.
I also very much enjoyed the magic system. The way necromancy worked was very interesting because you don't really see magic system being controlled by bells.
Mm-hmm. No, not usually, no.
And I love there's 9 different bells that you can use for necromancy.
That's really cool.
I mean, of course.
I mean, you can't do necromancy with only 8 bells.
But what about the secret 10th bell?
Well, technically, necromancers use 7 bells, but the Abhorsen uses 9 bells, if I remember correctly.
I believe you.
It sounds like the creators of this or the creator, I don't know, was very, very creative.
Garth Nix.
Garth Nix. I love his stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like really unique, really incredible. I like unique magic systems, unique worlds a lot. I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. I will take a hit on actual plot and character development just for a unique world setting and magic system. So
there's the original Abhorsen trilogy with Sabriel, Lyrio, and Abhorsen, and there's a prequel novel called Clariant, I believe is Clariel, which I didn't read because I got massively spoiled by accident. So here's a tip: don't look at the last. I was looking for the last page number, but I looked accidentally.
Oh no!
I looked at the acknowledgments, and there's a massive spoiler in the acknowledgments.
Wow!
And there's also I don't know if it's a direct sequel to Abhorsen, or a little time skip, Golden Hand, which I haven't read. I wasn't just feeling it. But the original trilogy I loved. I read right through them. They were brilliant.
I remember quite enjoying them. I just don't remember them terribly well at this point.
Yeah, I don't remember how many of these I've read, but those first couple are really good.
Yeah, I think Clariel was written in the early 2000s. There was a time skip, or there was a long wait period between Abhorsen and Clariel.
All right. Let's make Nick go next.
All right. So since we're just gonna drop this on me,
Boom.
this month I read actually the first book from the Witcher series, which is obviously, most people know the video game series with the success of the third game.
Now, this is the series that inspired the video games, right?
Yeah.
These aren't post.
Yes,
video
the
game.
books were written first.
Right.
Actually, my understanding, I haven't 100% fact checked this, but somebody who is a much bigger fan of the series told me that the author initially wrote basically some adventures of the Witcher going on these hunts, and like in the game, essentially the gameplay, wrote little short story adventures of what being a Witcher is like, going out slaying monsters for coin and stuff, and entered it into a short story contest and won. And he wasn't planning on making a series out of this or continuing it at all. And but because it was like, people really liked it, he decided, okay, well, I'll start making a series. And the series itself isn't really about The Witcher, and even in the video game, you can kind of tell he's sort of a character. He's the perspective character, but he's not what it's about. It's about this girl, Ciri. And so these books follow Ciri.
Does she tell you how to get places or tell you what words mean?
No, it's spelled a little
It's
different.
not that Ciri.
No. Okay.
It's short for Cirilla. But yeah, so one thing I will say is, just like in the games, unfortunately, it's kind of sad because it's a pretty good series, and I think that most people know it from the games instead of from the books. But just like in the games, I will say it's the war is very much present, but it's more of a setting than a direct part of the conflict. And the main reason for that is because Witchers, by trade, or by rule, I should say, Witchers, as a rule, don't get involved in wars. They try to stay out of it, and they try to stay neutral. But the war impacts the Witcher's job. There are these types of creatures that are called like necrophages, which basically, when there are fields of dead bodies, these creatures come out to eat the dead bodies. So Witchers often get called to go slay those monsters. So, and it also obviously just affects, like, tragedy will create, like, ghosts and spirits for them to fight, all sorts of things. So the war is pretty important to the story, but it is more of a setting than a actual direct conflict. So there was one point in particular in this. So the story follows Ciri as a young kid, essentially. She basically was supposed to be of royal lineage, and her family was pretty much all killed as a result of a war. And Geralt the Witcher essentially adopts her and trains her as a Witcher. And there are a lot of people who are coming after her, trying to catch her, and Geralt's basically trying to protect her. So that's sort of the thing. Unlike the game where Ciri's like fully grown, in the third game at least, she's a child in this. So she's very young, doesn't really know much about the world. And it's actually pretty fun to follow a character that young, and the way that they look at things is always more interesting,
So because the character is so young, would you consider this, like the other one, a little more in the young adult, or not at all?
No.
Because it's not from her perspective. It's sort of a third person point of view. So she's not the only main character, obviously, and there's a lot of one thing about the Witcher series I will say that I'm not really a fan of in general is a lot of sexual stuff. So there's a lot of like innuendo going on and things like that. But again, it's also kind of funny because it's from the point of view of a child at times.
Well, let me ask you a question,
Yes.
because I have experience with these video games. I don't think I ever played one to completion, but one thing I never totally understood, like, are the Witchers humans?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the Witchers are actually essentially mutated humans. So they're only men. Women don't become Witchers. but Ciri's obviously a girl, so they train her as a witcher, but they never make her a witcher because you actually have to undergo these mutations. They actually like give you these chemicals and make you go through these trials, and I think like 90% of the young boys who would go through these trials die. So only like 10% of them actually don't die and become witchers. But yeah, they basically have these mutations that make them live longer. They're stronger, they're faster, they're better fighters. But at this point in the story, the breed of witchers as a people is dying because there's a big battle, I guess, and there are no witchers left alive who know how to do the trials anymore. So they can't create new witchers.
Huh.
So they're sort of a dying breed at this point, but they live a long time, so it's not like they're the ones who are around are not in any danger of dying of old age anytime soon, for the most part.
It was also my understanding that monsters in the world are also slowly dying out.
I didn't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised. That makes sense.
I read the first two short story novels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the first book in the series. I should mention, that's a good point. There are 2 short story novels that come before it.
Yeah, I would recommend reading those 2 before the first book.
Yeah. So,
I just didn't like the over-sexual... I understand from Garrett's point of view, but it was very descriptive in certain female body parts a lot.
yeah, that is always one of the things that I don't like in... Generally speaking, I don't like it unless it's really necessary. And it's very, very rare in TV or in books or any story where it's actually really necessary. You know?
You don't want to read about boobs?
I'll tell you what, if it's necessary...
It was describing mermaid boobs. I'm like, I don't care what color her boobs are.
Yeah, things like
I'm
that.
not being
Well, hold
critical. I'm agreeing with you, but
They're different colored?
They're green, and then the areolas are darker green.
this is important knowledge.
Right. So
Yeah, I'm going to categorize that and put it somewhere safe for later.
I feel like there probably are very, very rare circumstances where it is necessary, but I'm having a hard time picturing any. You know, it's something that always bothered me about Game of Thrones, both the show and probably more so in the show, but also in the books. You know,
All the seemingly unnecessary sex scenes.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely...
The shock value.
On TV, it's a whole different monster because it's literally just to get people to watch. You know, but even the books have a lot of description that I just find, like, very just weird. It's just, you know, I don't get it. And that is one of the things that I would say I don't obviously like about this book, but so there is one major point in talking about war that I kind of want to get to with this book, because at one point, as Ciri's getting a little bit older, they decide to, you know, they're keeping her safe, like I said, away from the war and away from people who are trying to get her, but they have to start traveling out, and they have to bring her basically away from the safety. And there's sort of this battle going on. There are a lot of wars, but one of them is sort of devolving into a racial war, which is a whole topic that we really didn't even get into. But essentially a racial war between, like, the elves, and in addition to the elves, also the gnomes and the dwarves to a lesser extent, versus humans. So basically any of these minority groups seen as others who get treated differently by the humans who predominantly are ruling these lands, they all begin to sort of revolt, and they create a group called the Scoia'tael, which in Elvish means squirrels, and they're basically attacking the humans from the trees and escaping before the humans can catch them. And so there's this sort of battle going on, and Ciri, who's now old enough, she's been trained with a weapon, and, you know, for the first time she feels like, I can actually do something. You know, these people are killing people, and I want to stop them. And Geralt, who always tells her we have to remain neutral, right? She sort of conflates neutrality with indifference in this point. She's saying, why are you being indifferent? Like, people are dying. If I have a sword, I can defend people. And so there's this really interesting, really cool part where Geralt takes her to this these ruins, these elven ruins, and you see a statue of a female elf, and he explains to her that the last time the humans and the elves got in a conflict, all of the elves wanted to just sort of retreat and move to a different place and just sort of let bygones be bygones. And there was one female elf who sort of roused up all of the young elves to come back and fight the humans. And he says, and what happened is they all died. All of the young elves died. And only the young elves can reproduce. And basically, it created this sort of lost generation, maybe akin to the real-life lost generation from both world wars. A whole generation of elves gone, unable to reproduce. And he says, basically he teaches us this lesson at this point that being neutral doesn't mean being indifferent. In fact, like, our neutrality is compassion, because if we got involved, we would be killing these elves.
Does that end up being the kind of the authorial perspective? Because Geralt is the wiser, more experienced worldly mentor character. So is what he's saying effectively the authorial message?
One thing that I find really interesting about the series, I'm going to answer your question this way, is Ciri has many mentors. And the story is about her, essentially. But she has many mentors, and a lot of them have different opinions on a lot of things. So I would say Geralt is one of her strongest mentors, and that is his opinion, but I think she has other mentors who would probably disagree with that to a degree.
Well, sure, but Geralt is also the point of view character, right?
There is no real point of view character. It's like third-person perspective. They just kind of describe what's happening to these characters, if that makes sense. So okay. Geralt is one of the main characters. Ciri is one of the main characters.
Okay.
So I think to a degree, yes. I think some of the other characters would say, well, you need to get involved in war to stop it, to get to the same goals. You know what I mean?
Right.
Of protecting themselves.
I'm curious because I find myself agreeing more with Ciri in this case. That it's the old adage. What is it? The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing.
Right. It is a conflict, and they end up actually having to fight a little bit too, which is sort of. I think the sort of perspective of Geralt is that we don't want to go out of our way to kill these people, and if we have to, it's kind of a tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't view it as like, oh, we're saving these people. We should view it as this is tragic. Like, no matter what, it's tragic. Somebody's dying, and that's bad,
Yeah, I think it's a good sign in books, or I guess most storytelling, when characters have different viewpoints that both feel compelling or can feel compelling to the readers, because it feels more real. We all know that life is shades of gray, not black and white.
One thing I also will say is Geralt is kind of hard to read at times, because Witchers are notoriously, after they go through these trials and these chemical changes, they sort of are known to not lose emotion, but they don't.
Expressiveness?
Yeah, they don't express their emotions very well afterwards. They kind of are very just neutral and calm, and so he is kind of hard to read at times. But I only read the first book. This is a pretty long series, and I'm excited to dig in deeper. So I will also say, if you guys like the Witcher games, I think you will like the series.
I heard the games were described to me was like a fan fiction to the story.
And I would say that's pretty accurate in a way.
It is like a sequel fan fiction. The games don't go into the story. It's afterward, I guess.
Yeah, they sort of touch upon like notes of the story, but they don't really they're not the story. They're not canon. Part of that is because the games wanted to give you choice in how you play Geralt, but the books, Geralt is a very certain way.
Yeah, and the Netflix show is following the books rather than the game.
Right.
I'm kind of excited for that show. That might be an unpopular opinion.
No,
I want to give it a chance.
I'm excited to watch it. I hope it's good. It looks like that a lot of the people involved really care about the series. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, me too. So, Nick, this series is, I want to say, not originally in English. It's Polish, right?
Yeah. That's correct. The author is Polish.
Did it feel like the translation was spot on? It wasn't tricky in any way?
No, I thought it was a very
up?
good translation. Like, it wasn't just like... I mean, I don't often read books translated to English. So, but it felt... I didn't even notice. I guess that's the way to put it. I could barely notice that it was translated.
Nice.
So...
Cool.
The only translation thing that I noticed would be like roach is not talking about like his name not named after a cockroach, it's named after a fish.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know that.
Oh, because that's a Polish language pun sort of joke, right?
I do not remember. I just know it's like the original Polish is like based off the fish, not the cockroach.
Right, okay. Cool. I'll have to put that one on the to be read list.
Yeah.
Me too. Although I think start with the short story collections. Is that right?
That's what was recommended. I really enjoyed The Last Wish. The Sword of Destiny was kind of meh. It kind of went overboard with the over sexualization for me.
Oh yeah.
I would say I would have preferred to read the short stories first, but for this topic of war, I figured, my girlfriend was telling me that this one's really good for that.
That's fair.
But there are definitely, reading this, I could tell there was some backstory that I was missing.
Yeah, I totally understand that.
It's not anything like if you played the game, it's the exact same way where there's lots of backstory that you're missing, but it's pretty easy to pick up what happened. And it's the same way, so you don't need to, but I think it would definitely enhance the read.
That is correct.
So that's it for me.
I say it's Daniel's turn.
Not me. Oh no. Okay. Sorry.
That was very dramatic.
I'm trying to step my game up from Vanilla Human. I'm gonna be
Vanilla Human with
vanilla with
sprinkles.
sprinkles. Yeah.
You're going to
You're
be the
also-
nominalist.
But you're also a Ghostbuster, so you're a little more than a human.
Yeah, but I'm probably like not the regular Ghostbusters. I'm like the tax attorney Ghostbuster at the end of the second one. The Rick Moranis character. Yeah.
You just say there's a ghost there, and you don't actually fight it.
Yeah, I'm the ghost locator. Yeah. I guess they have ghost hunters. I guess that's the thing. Oh no, I'm like those plumbers. Oh man, it's not as cool. All right, so the book I read was called Shrouded Loyalties by Reese Hogan, and I guess I put it on Front Street that I am acquainted with this author, and she did give me an early copy of this book to read, so that was actually pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yay!
Yeah, we met. We're friends from the Writing Excuses retreat, which I was able to attend a couple of years ago, and
Nice.
had a bunch of cool authors on that, and hopefully I'll get some more freebies pretty soon. But this one, Shrouded Loyalties by Reese Hogan. Yeah, I mean, this is straight up a war book, probably more than I think I've heard any of you guys, any of the other books we've talked about. This one is directly related, where the war and is tied intrinsically to the plot. It's about Mia Blackwood, who is a soldier on a submarine, and the submarine has been given new technology that allows it to essentially travel through an alternate dimension so that it can then exit that alternate dimension anywhere else on the world. So they use it as like a travel substitute, so they're able to like kind of teleport around the world in this submarine, and it's helping them fight a war. But when they use it, it turns out that this other dimension is not unpopulated. There are kind of cosmic horrors that live in this place, and Mia is attacked by one of these during one of the shroudings and is marked by these creatures. And the story is kind of her having to come to terms with both what it means to be marked by these creatures, and also coming to terms with her family's place in the war, her people's, why they're at war at all. She has a brother who has become seduced by a spy from the other side. And I really, really enjoyed this, mostly because when I typically read war stories, they lose, we've kind of talked about it. They sometimes lose the character thread and they pull back too far, and you're looking at just like a big war story, and
They focus on the war at the expense of the character.
yeah, right, exactly right. So in this one, I felt like the characters are such a key part, and they are exploring constantly the reasons for the war and the things that are keeping the war going, that it just did a really great job. And Mia as a character, I thought was pretty good, but there's a third sort of point of view character whose name is Holland, who has maybe my favorite part of the book. And it's tough because Holland's struggle in the story is kind of spoilery to get into, but this character is one that is struggling with personal identity, trying to understand, because I'll say what isn't a spoiler is that Holland is a spy for the opposite side. So he's sort of against Mia, even though they work together. And Mia saves his life a few times. But as a spy, he's trying to come to terms with feelings that he has where, he actually likes some of the things that, the government on this side does. Like his government doesn't respect women, even though they are the much larger, more technically advanced society. They have this kind of horrible character flaw essentially to their society that he's struggling to overcome and understand as his country, which is very much seems to be the aggressor, starts to absorb the country that he's in spying on Mia with. So it's that kind of very easy to understand, easily relatable character story wrapped up in this kind of crazy techno fantasy, with going in alternate dimensions and fighting weird tentacle monsters sometimes, fantasy story. So I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and it is a really good mix. Like it doesn't spend too much time in one or the other. It doesn't ever feel like the real story is the war story, and the cosmic horror is kind of sprinkled on top. It's not. There are these two kind of very competing elements that blend really well together to make an excellent plot.
Very cool.
So, I mean, I almost don't want to talk too much more about it because I enjoyed it so much. And it can be, it has a lot of surprises. So, any plot details that I really talk about can be spoilery, but I do think it's, it might go on like my top 5 for the year so far. It's a really excellent book.
When does it come out?
So let's see. This episode is the September episode, so I think it's probably already out as you are listening to this.
And where can people buy it?
I believe it's out now. For those of you that are here with me in the recording, you can find it anywhere that you find your books, bookstores, and Amazon. I think it's already.
All right.
What was it called again?
That's Shrouded Loyalties by Reese Hogan.
Very, very cool.
Mm.
We should probably get in the habit of doing that, repeating the names of these books.
That's right.
That is, yeah.
Especially for authors who I'm sure would really appreciate it, such as this one.
All right. Mine was pretty fast.
Speedy. All right.
Okay, I guess I will go if we have nothing else to say about Daniel's book.
Let me apologize and excuse myself. I'm sorry that I have to go.
It's fine.
Oh, I am disappointed to miss Katie's book.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
You're going to miss out on Dinosaurs.
On the bright side, you can listen to it on the podcast.
Ooh.
I do listen to the podcast. I just hate the sound of my voice because I sound like an idiot.
You'll get over that.
I
That's okay.
also hate my voice because I also sound like an idiot.
I make my wife listen to it and critique me. So everybody say hi to my wife. Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
Daniel's wife.
Hi, Dan's wife.
I feel like she has a name.
It's Julie.
Hi, Julie.
Julie's her
Hi.
name.
Hi,
Julie.
Hi, Dan's Julie. All right, I do have to go.
All right, Peter.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Ninja vanish.
He's gone.
Okay.
That was pretty
He's gone
impressive.
forever.
All right, Katie, the floor is yours.
All right. So the book I did this month was The Dinosaur Lords by Victor Milan. So basically, you have a few different characters that are the main characters. Like how you have so there's Rob Corrigan, who is a dinosaur master, meaning that he's kind of like a stableman almost for dinosaurs. Like he takes care of them for the lords and the knights. But he is the main point of view in the opening scene, which is in the middle of a battle. And it caused a little confusion to me at first because it was mostly just a whole bunch of name dropping. Like you have, Rob Corrigan, and then, oh no, here comes Voivod Karl Bogumirski. And then now incoming. Name? Yeah, Voivod is actually the title. His title of, it's like a
noble title.
Yeah. Okay. And then we also have Count Jamais. He's main part of the book. He's the Imperial Champion, Lord of the Flowers, and commander of the legendary companions. So you get all these name dropping, all these titles, and I enjoyed the beginning a lot more during my second read through of the book. As with most books, I actually enjoy it more the second time. So you have these characters that they're mostly paired throughout the book. Like there's a Princess Melodia. She's paired with Jamais, who they're actually basically betrothed, but it isn't official. Then we have the Voivod Karl and Rob Corrigan. So they never actually all four get together in the book, but it gets very close at the beginning and very close at the end. It kind of alludes to maybe the two storylines will converge in the next book. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that would frustrate me. I'd be like, they're so close! No!
Yeah, it was like that, right at the end, they're like, oh, no, you have to go to this place where these other guys are. And then the fourth character is like, oh no, should I go there too and be with them? And it gets really close, but also so far.
Yeah.
So how is it treating the dinosaurs? I mean, are they intrinsic to the story, or is it just kind of, hey, this is a normal fantasy story, but dinosaurs are?
It's kind of like the second one, oh yeah, dinosaurs, we use them as beasts of burden. There are war mounts, even though there are horses too. They use them as food supply. They're pests, and they don't get used enough, I feel, in this book. But maybe they'll get a little more screen time, as it were, in the next two.
How intelligent are the dinosaurs?
They're mostly just treated like dopey animals, except there's one who is kind of a main character. She gets a few viewpoint chapters. Her name is She-Ra, and she's an Allosaurus, which we all know what that is, obviously. It's a kind of like a T-Rex. It's a smaller version of a meat-eating dinosaur. She is trying to find her, air quotes, mother, who is Karl Bogumirski.
Wait, the mother is Karl?
Yeah, because she imprinted on him.
Oh, okay. That's
so
funny.
As she was hatching, he just happened to be there slaying her actual mother.
Oh God.
How different are her POV characters? Does it feel like a human, even though she's not human?
She kind of feels like like a child. How she's like, oh, I'm hungry, but mother says that I can't eat the 2 legs, meaning humans, but I need to find my mother. And it's kind of sad because I want her to, find her mom. It's so cute.
So but the Allosaurus seems to get to understand, if it's not able to communicate, but it can kind of understand human language, or
She actually never, from her viewpoint, it never shows her with other humans. She's only, by herself trying to find Carl.
Okay. That's an interesting take. I did not think this story would have that kind of element.
I didn't either, but I loved it. For some reason, I just strongly associate with this dinosaur.
It's probably the scales.
I feel like that's only natural. Yeah.
How do you think they played the war element? Was it more like glorification? I don't like the word glorification, but like more, you know what I mean, and or the war is hell or something like that.
So thank you for bringing me back to our topic because I was going way out. So there's the different elements, like we get the viewpoints from a foot soldier, from, the commander of the companions, as a mounted knight, he's like, oh, battle, we must do this for glory. And, if there's no honor, we still have to do it, but it'll be a little more, not as righteous.
So he's all for king and country type guy.
Yeah, like he actually has to lead this war that he doesn't want to be a part of, but he has to because he was told.
He feels like it's his duty.
Yep. Okay. We also get the Voivod's viewpoint where he's training in new recruits that are from a pacifist country. That part, they obviously are like, war is hell. We don't want this here, but we have to because these invaders are trying to take us over. But we still need to protect our homes, and it gets pretty bloody.
Like grimdark kind of bloody, like too much.
I wouldn't say too much, but like there's not very many actual battle sequences, I think. But just the fact that when it gets a little graphic.
Like, I mean, there's dinosaurs, so are we talking about people being devoured kind of constantly?
Well, not constantly.
Oh, okay. But a primary feature of the battle is who and what part of them is torn apart and
yeah, there's even one part where there's someone is sentenced to death by the king. The executioner is actually just a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Oh, that's badass.
I really like that kind of mostly.
They could have used a little more dinosaurs in that capacity. Like, this one has a job. This one, otherwise there was another dinosaur who had a pretty decent role. Her name was Little Nell, and she was an Inosaurus. And, I just love these dinosaurs.
So, I wanted to ask you then, were the dinosaurs viewed as more of a weapon or a casualty in terms of the war?
Several times when mentioning the dinosaur knights, those who ride dinosaurs into battle, it's always mentioned that their greatest weapon was their mount.
Mm-hmm.
And Jamais, he was even like, he cares about his dinosaur Camellia as like a little sister. But when he was riding a horse, he was like, oh yeah, this dumb beast that I have to ride.
Oh, that's an interesting juxtaposition there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when the dinosaurs, I'm assuming dinosaurs probably die as a result of war here, and are they? Is it tragic?
Yeah, because not only are they, these majestic, big, beautiful creatures, they're expensive.
Oh, so it's tragic on the wallet.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
got it. I like that. I really like the horse thing. The thing about the horse you just said. That was so often they portray the horse as like a knight's like best friend kind of thing almost. Or
Yeah, that's like how they're treating, their dinosaur mount, but he doesn't prefer horses. He prefers his dinosaur.
I'm trying to picture how they get up on these dinosaurs, because dinosaurs are big.
They have an arming squire help them up.
I was just picturing a ladder.
No, it's more like the, link your hands and then hoist them up.
A human ladder.
Yeah.
That poor squire.
So do you think you're going to keep reading the series?
I bought the next one yesterday.
Nice.
I actually bought the third one first, unintentionally, because I was just in a store and I'm like, oh, I like dinosaurs. Ooh, it says princess in the title. Might as well get it.
I wish books did have a little thing that said, this is book 3. Stop being dumb.
I don't think you should call
Yeah,
your
it didn't
readers
say it
dumb.
like on the it didn't say it like on the outside cover at all. And now looking at the second book, the only spot that I see anything about it not being a first book is in little tiny print here. It says The Dinosaur Knights is the second in Victor Milan's lush exotic tale about knights riding dinosaurs.
I do hate it when books don't have a number on the side binding.
Yeah. I think they're perfectly happy to accept the additional sales that Katie offers by unintentionally not buying the correct book.
I've talked about this before, but the Air series by Cinder Willing Diamond is the worst with that.
Yes, it is. Oh my god.
Yeah, that's a no-go for me.
But the first book is so good. And then I accidentally read the second book because it was a gift.
Accidentally read the book.
Okay, it was given to me by my mother at camp. And I was just like, I'll read this because I'm bored. And it was like, I'm confused.
Yeah, I think she was picturing that you like tripped and fell and accidentally read every single page on your way down.
Yep.
You landed on the book so hard, the knowledge just flowed into your body.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
Or when you sleep on a book and it just, you learn through osmosis.
Yeah.
God, I wish that really worked.
Same, I would sleep on my textbooks.
Well, before Rachel starts talking about school again, I think we did it. Is this another podcast?
That's a podcast.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to our podcast this month. We've had me, Katie, Dan, Nick, Rachel, and Peter. Thanks.
You can follow us on our individual Twitters, and you can find our reviews on TooManyThoughtsMedia.com.
So long.